If you want to get more downloads on your podcast episodes, it's essential that you title each episode right. Because even if you've spent a huge amount of time making the perfect episode, if the title doesn't entice your listener to click and listen, then it's going to be effort wasted. So in this video, we're going to get straight into it. I'm going to go over the 12 templates that we use to title podcast episodes to make them enticing and get people to click. And before we start, I'm just going to go over the 7 guidelines that we use that whatever you title any episode, you've got to keep these in mind. So the first thing is to always keep your ideal listener in mind. So you need to know exactly who your ideal listener is, what their pain points and challenges are, why they'd want to click on your episodes. You can look back at your old analytics for your old episodes, see which ones perform best. So regardless of these templates and things, knowing sort of which one to choose is going to be based on how well you know your ideal listener. The second one is to make the outcome that will get from the episode clear and specific. So let's say you have a nutrition podcast or something. There's no point in giving it a kind of generic title around the theme of the episode, like fruit and veg. You're going to want to make it really clear what they're going to get out of listening to the episode. So, for example, use this strategy to make sure you get your 5 fruit and veg every day or something like that. Just make it really clear why they should click on that episode. The third one is no episode numbers or guest names at the start of the title. It's just wasted space and doesn't help in terms of convincing someone to listen unless it's a household name. And I'm going to go over some examples of this in a moment. Use title case primarily, so capitals on each word. And then you can use power words all in caps if you want to attract attention. You can use sentence case, but just based on most of the most popular podcasts, they're using title case and it helps it to stand out. Number 5, use chosen SEO words if they do not get in the way of writing a human clickable title. So that means you can use words that you know your audience are going to be searching for, so search engine optimized keywords, but the title still needs to sound like it's been written by a human and not a robot. And then aim to keep below 60 characters and ensure titles stand out by avoiding using the same template for every episode. So I'm going to show you these 12 templates now, and you can keep them in mind, but we do want to make sure we're sort of changing it up each episode. Otherwise, they don't stand out when you've released a new one. And if you want a copy of this document so you can keep it at hand when you're writing episodes, just go to claricast.com/titles and you can download it there. And I'll leave a link in the description. So the first template, and this is a big one, it's the numbered list. So for example, X number of tips, tricks, strategies, steps, ways to achieve specific outcome. So like we said about achieving that specific outcome, the 5 fruit and veg a day, but it's putting a number in front of it. So loads of like blogs for years and years have used this technique because it just gets more clicks. Like we've seen for our clients' podcasts, every time we use a numbered list, or almost every time, like it's a really clear correlation, they tend to get more clicks because they're easily digestible content. Like if somebody knows that they can listen through these 7 tips and they're easy to remember, then it makes it more attractive to listen, makes it kind of bite size. I don't know exactly what the psychology around this is, but it works. So if you can position a certain episode in terms of like a number of tips, tricks, strategies, whatever, then it can help to get more clicks. The second one is the how-to, and I'm probably going to use this for this video as well. So you've got your specific goal, and then you're putting a how-to in front. So it's just making it really clear what the outcome that they're going to get is, and it shows them that it's going to give them the exact instructions. So how to achieve specific goal within time frame. So how to build a successful online business in 6 months, how to master public speaking in 30 days, how to avoid common financial mistakes. Yeah, so you get the idea. The third one is the question open loop. Now, some of these do sort of blend between, so you can use a combination of both, but this sort of separating them in 12 just makes it easy to understand the different techniques that we're using. So do you, and then problem, question mark. Do you wonder why your marketing efforts aren't paying off? And you can also use this technique in the first line of your show notes as well as a hook, because it kind of makes, it's that open loop. It makes the listener or the potential listener think controversial or provocative titles. And this is kind of leaning into the more negative words, because typically negative words can actually increase click-throughs because people want to avoid whatever the bad thing is. And there's references to where I've got this data up here. But I did read that a negative word in your headline can increase click-through rate by 2.3% over a positive one. So for example, why email marketing is dead. And if you compare this with something that most of your audience don't already believe, but that you believe is different, then it's more likely to get them to click through. And then we got, this is why your podcast isn't growing. So I've taken this from the podcast that's called This Is Why Your Podcast Isn't Growing, hosted by Anthony Winery and Tygo Shea. It's just a really good podcast title, but you can use that kind of strategy for your episodes as well. And again, this goes back to knowing your audience. If you know that there's a specific challenge they struggle with, like growing their podcast, or, you know, going back to the nutrition example, this is why you're not getting your 5 fruit and veg a day. Again, it kind of leaves that open loop, and it gets people to want to know the answer. The next one is myth busting titles. So this kind of blends into the previous one, but it's more focused around giving your audience the truth about a particular myth that some people believe. So the truth about overnight success, for example. The sixth one is how I or how we. So this is not how to, this is around personal stories. So if you've got a guest on that has an incredible story and you know that your audience are going to want to replicate whatever that person did, you can put that as a how I or how we. So for example, how I built $1 million business in 12 months with Jim Big Guest. Number 7, expert advice and insights. So again, if you know you've got like a really smart person on your podcast as an interview guest, then you can position that around them being an expert. So expert advice on navigating the stock market. Just as an example, I had one of these recently where I had an Emmy-winning podcaster on my podcast. So I got that in there. So how to get this, well, I've used 2 different strategies here. I've used the how-to and the expert advice. So how to get discovered and stay relevant as a podcaster with Emmy-winning Vinny Postavito. And then I've done the same thing there, essential podcasting tips and tricks from a 15-year plus podcaster. So it's showing your listener that kind of social proof, that authority that this person is worth listening to. Then we've got what and why explainers. So this is kind of similar to the how-to, but it's just positioning it in a different way, and it's getting really specific on the outcome. So the reason why you're getting ghosted. Versus comparison titles. Again, this can be quite effective at evoking that conflict. Again, if you know your audience and you know that some of them would have a certain opinion about something and some might have the other opinion, you can kind of pit those two together. So we got working from home versus office, which is more productive. I put out a video a little while ago that had one podcast microphone versus another podcast microphone. These are both really popular mics that I know a lot of people are wondering which is better. And that worked really well as a title. Then we got behind the scenes titles. So if you've gone to a particular event or you're privy to some information around a certain event and you know your audience will be interested in takeaways, then you can position it around that. So for example, if I go to the podcast show again this year in 2025, then I could do an episode around 9 takeaways from the podcast show, because not everyone will be able to go to there. So it will give them a kind of behind the scenes look. Trends and predictions. So people want to know what's coming up next, especially when things are changing in the world, with AI, with the example I've put there, interest rates. So they want someone who can tell the future. Now that's probably not going to be you, but if you have at least a good insight of what could potentially happen, or you've got a guest on, then that's a really great way of positioning it. And then finally, before we take a look at some more examples of these, we've got Q&A and advice sessions. So this is not just a title idea, this is also an episode idea. You can ask your audience to drop in their questions, and then just by titling your episode around that, so answering your questions about social media marketing, we could even get a capital "your" in there just to make it really clear that the listeners are going to get their own questions answered. So these are the 12 templates. Again, you can use parts of one, parts of the other. You can make up your own, but it's just to give you a good bank of ideas that you can use. A lot of these you'll just be able to plug in topics from your podcast and your listeners' pain points, and then start to use them. And as I said, we can take a look at some more examples of these. If you want a load more examples, obviously I use these templates in my own podcast. So you can have a look at Podcasting Amplified and see these in action. And then a note about having guest names in the title, because I know this can be, a lot of podcasts do this in a different way. Sometimes I don't even bother. Like, I've got Seth Goldstein there. I've got his name in the show notes, and obviously I've shared it on social media and highlighted that he's in it. But unless it's a household name, you don't need to put it in there at all, or at least just put it at the end. Like, there are some podcasts, and I don't mean to put anyone on blast here, and this isn't anything negative about the content, but some podcasts, there won't be anything in the title that is actually convincing people to listen. So most of the listeners for this podcast, for example, they don't know who these people are. And also bear in mind that when you scroll through your podcast feed on Spotify or whatever, often you can only see the first few words. So if you start off with an episode number, a name, then that might be all you'll get your subscribers even see. And there's nothing there to convince them to listen. Now, this podcast, some of these are household names, so it's a little bit different. And I know podcasts like Diary of a CEO that have, huge guests like Michelle Obama, they put the name sort of right up front. But even then, they're still putting like shocking or controversial comments from people and other things that are going to get people to click. So what I would suggest is download this. It's free. Again, I'll leave a link below. Have a look through your titles and just really try and get into the mindset of your ideal listener and ask yourself, if I was this person, maybe you are the ideal listener, would I click this episode? Is this giving me a really clear outcome that I'm going to get some value when I click on this episode? And then once you've got them, then that's your content's turn to keep them engaged. And it'd be great to know in the comments if you do change any titles. Leave them in the comments below and let me know what you changed them to. It'd be really cool to see. And for more podcasting tips and tutorials, hit that subscribe button. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.